Hi, I'm Dan. I'm the developer for Danger Zone, which is a module for Foundry Virtual Tabletop. This will be an overview of the module Danger Zone for version 13 of Foundry using the D&D 5e system. Danger Zone can be used in any system, so it's not just restricted to D&D. What is a Danger Zone? Well, it's a module that helps play randomized effects on a scene to try to mimic things like environmental events, chaotic war zones, and other types of effects. The randomization can be controlled, but it does open up the possibility for environmental behaviors to make your scenes come to life. The module itself, Danger Zone, includes two core components, one of which is the danger, the second of which is the zone. Dangers are artifacts that encode how an event behaves. So, for example, you might want to, I'll use this scene as an example. There is a large pit, and I might want someone, if they move into these squares, to fall a certain distance. That falling for a certain distance is the event that the danger encodes, because it would encode a certain amount of movement being forced on a token. The zone defines where on the scene the danger would happen, how it's triggered, and what it targets. So zones are tied to scenes. Dangers can be used across multiple zones, and so they're reusable. So in that same example with something moving into a pit, the zone would define where the pit actually is on the map. So I could define a zone here, just like I would with a region, and then I would define what triggers that. It might be movement going in there, and then how does it target. So they function in similar ways as regions. This module existed before regions, and there's more functionality that's available within the zone than becomes available with the region. If you have regions, you can associate the dimensions of the region directly to a zone. Before I show how to set up your first danger zone on a map, which is what we'll do with this overview, I want to show a couple of settings that I find very useful, especially if you're just getting started with the module. I'm going to go into configure settings. You'll see that I have no other modules enabled. There are a lot of other modules that integrate with Danger Zone, and I'll cover those a little bit later. I'll select Danger Zone here, and the things that I think are good to turn on as you get started or make sure that they're turned on is, one, have the Dangers button displayed. That will make it so that the Dangers button shows on the scene over here, where I'm highlighting in the top right hand corner. We'll get to that in a little bit. The other thing is to highlight the danger target area. That means that when the danger actually targets on the map and on trigger, you'll see that area highlighted, so that you know that it's working and where it's targeting. That's not going to display for players, so if you leave that on as a GM, it will only show for you. The last thing that I think is very useful is to have the chat details to GM selected. And so there's a option here, chat zone details to GM on trigger. If you check that, a chat message to the GM will be generated, and it will tell you some information about the zone that just triggered. So we'll see how that all performs once we set up and trigger our first zone. So the first step is to create the danger. You need the danger before you can associate it to a zone. So let's create a danger. I'm going to go up here to the top right hand corner, choose the dangers button. Again, the danger defines what happens. So I have no dangers already set up, so I'm going to choose one here to add. With this danger, I'm presented with multiple buttons here. I refer to these as danger parts. So out of the box, the Danger Zone module comes with 16 different danger parts. As you add on other modules, more parts become enabled. A big module that I think is really great to have with Danger Zone is Sequencer. You probably already have that, but if you don't, Sequencer is great because it plays visual effects and sounds that are tied to those effects. And so Danger Zone, if you have Sequencer, you will see more parts available on Danger Zone to use around generating effects. I'll have later videos that show what those parts are and how you might use them. The other one is Portal, if you want to be able to warp in or drop tokens in on when the danger is generated. And then the last module, which won't actually create another part, but that has, I think is great for visual effects, is the JB2A. They have a free version and a Patreon version. I definitely recommend checking out JB2A. That's also the home for Danger Zone for questions and for getting updates on modules. All right, so all that said, let's create our first danger. I'm going to have this danger do two things when it triggers. One, it will play a weather event just to set some type of atmosphere, and then two, it will kick off a combat. So I'm going to call this Moody Combat. I'll give it a little exclamation point. You can tie an icon to it that helps within later on when we get our trigger buttons that are tied to this danger to help you kind of say, oh, that's what this danger is, just by visually looking at it. So I'm going to choose combat. So when we see this later, we'll see the combat icon tied to this danger. Dimensions is just how big is the danger when it actually hits the map. The default is 1 square. We can make this larger or smaller. The bigger it is, the more likely it's going to target multiple tokens and hit a token. For this one, because we're doing combat and weather, the main impact it's going to have is with combat. So if I have it by 1, it will target 1 square, which likely computes to 1 token, and the combat event will affect them. Weather is seen is across the scene, so there's really nothing that having a dimension on a danger is going to affect there. So let me choose the combat one. With this, what I want this danger to do is create a new combat, add the targeted token to the combat, roll their initiative, start the combat. So let's have it create the new combat. We're going to add anything targeted by the zone to the combat. So again, this danger is 1 by 1. The zone will target 1 square, and the token in that square will be added to the combat. We are going to roll their initiative, even if they're player-owned characters, and then we'll kick the combat off and get it started. Because I want it to be moody before the combat starts, I'm going to delay this. This is by milliseconds, so I will type in 10,000. Let's, for the video purposes, let's just do 6,000. So you'll see later, I'm going to get to the weather in a second, but this part, when this part generates, it will wait 6 seconds before it kicks off the combat part here. Now that I've saved that, you see it becomes highlighted here. I can clear out my settings by hitting the delete button. I also wanted to do something with weather to set an atmosphere. So I'm going to choose it to do a heavy rainstorm. If I wanted that rain just to last about 10 seconds or whatever, I could set a duration for how long it plays. If I don't set a duration, it's just going to add it to the scene and it will stay there. I'm not going to delay this because that's the first thing I want to have happen. So we're going to have the rain start, and then 6 seconds later, combat will start. I could do other stuff like sounds, create walls, interact with tokens. If it's on D&D 5e, that means saving throws and damage. I can change settings on the scene. I can add regions. I can change token attributes. I can move tokens. I can create tiles. I can roll a rollable table. I can add items to tokens. If I have item piles module, I can drop items on the map. I can play a sound, I can add an ambient light or an ambient sound to the map, or I can add or toggle active effects. So there's a bunch I can do out of the box. If I set it as a world zone, all that does is once I create this danger, if it's a world zone, it becomes something that can be triggered on any scene that I have. Otherwise, to use a danger, you actually have to configure it on a scene. And there's pros and cons to each. This one I'm just going to leave as is. I'll save it. Now I have my first danger. And let me just cancel out. So now that I have a danger and I have a scene, I want to add that danger to this scene because I want to be able to actually make use of it and trigger it. How do I add a danger to a scene? To do that, I have to associate it to a zone, and I have to have that zone be on the scene. So how do I create a zone? On your left-hand side controls, you'll see a new icon added by danger zone. Let me select off of it so you can kind of see. When you select it, it will open up this executor, which right now doesn't look like much because I don't have much going on with this zone. But as we add, scene, but as we add zones, you'll start to see buttons show up here. I can configure zones here. This is how I add a zone. So my executor is how I trigger zones, unless manually or toggle the automated zones off and on. I can configure zones through this little configuration, and this is how I add them. So here's my little add button. Moody Combat, it already comes pre-default because I only have one danger. I'll call this Moody Combat Start. So now I'm naming the zone on the scene, and I'm associating it to this danger. Flavor, I can use that just to put something in the chat for everyone to see, like OMG, a combat is starting. So that will show when this zone triggers. What are the dimensions of the zone? I don't have any regions on this zone right now, so the only option I have is to use the full map. If I have regions on a scene, I can choose a region in this drop-down, and then my zone dimensions take on the same dimensions as that region. Some of these are more expert type of settings that I'm not going to really cover, but there's some help here. There's a full wiki tied to our repository that you can go to and learn more about what those settings do. There's a lot of events to choose from that are automated. They're tied to token movement, roll table results, and combat events. I'm just going to keep this as a manually triggered one. Likelihood, you can use this if you want the trigger to be not all the time. So, if you have an event that triggers off of round start, you might not want it to trigger every round, but you might want it to be kind of the risk of it triggering at 25% or whatever. So if you want it 1 out of every 4 rounds, maybe it generates, you'd set this to 25. And so there's a 25 and 100 chance that, or a 25% chance that this will generate. Loop count just means how many times does the danger play. I'll keep this at 1. Doesn't really make sense to start multiple combats. You can see there's delays here. It will delay between the min and the maximum set. I'll skip source for now. There's a little bit more of a expert type of thing, but that's how you add in things like behaviors and events and how they influence the big bad boss person. It also is a way to say, like, this zone actually will never trigger unless that big bad boss is on the scene as a source. Targets is what are targeted by the zone. So again, the size of what's being targeted, or the size of the area targeted, is defined within the danger. The zone defines the full dimensions of where that target might happen, and then you have settings here that further restrict the target. If nothing's checked here, it's just going to randomly, whenever this zone triggers, it's going to randomly select a square within the overall zone dimension, but I can restrict that down. So for example, if I just want to choose the location on trigger, I'll get a prompt as a GM, and I can select that as a spot on the map. I can even choose what elevation it happens at, or just make it be 0. I could have so in this case, if a square is targeted, or a grid area that is targeted that has tokens in it, I can have all of those tokens be targeted. Otherwise, the danger is just going to, or the zone's just going to target one of those tokens. And then finally, I can choose that it always hits a token. So in this case, that's what I want to have happen, just so you can see how this all works. So when I trigger the zone, it's going to randomly select a token within the overall grid's within the dimensions of the zone. It's going to target that, and then the effects of the danger will apply to that token, which are start combat, and put them in there. I can restrict what this affects based on the actors within my game. I only have 3 here. I'm not going to do that. I'll choose between these 2 that are on the map. We have an ape and we have a warrior. I can only affect certain dimensions if I want. These are all multi-select, and I can exclude conditions. I can do a clear event. I'm actually going to set that up for the weather. So this means that if I trigger this zone, it will play that weather effect, and as I said, that's going to stick on the map. If I trigger it again, it's going to play another weather event. I might want to clear out the existing one. I don't think that would have any effect with this case because weather just kind of stays there. And it's only one weather for the type of weather we chose. But I'll just show you how that works there. Extensions, I won't really go into this, but this is how you can make it so that if this zone triggers, it triggers other zones, even if that zones don't have the same condition that this one does. So you can kind of chain zone triggers one after the other through extensions. All right, I've saved that. I now have a zone saved. The other thing you see is I now have a button on my executor. It's using that icon that we set on the combat danger part. The combat danger is my swords. So this, and then I hover over it, it shows me it's the moody combat. That's my danger, and it tells me what events will trigger it. So it will be triggered by manual events. I can now close out of this. You're like, why is the scene turning orange? It's because when you hover over the button, it shows you on the map the dimensions of the zone. So because this is the full map, I can see it's all orange when I hover over. When I hover off, that comes off. Your players don't see that. That's just for the GM. So let's trigger it. I'm going to go into the chat area so you can see how this all kind of plays out in chat notifications. Remember, we set that setting where we're going to be informed about all the kind of parts of the trigger here. So it's going to chat that to the GM. We can look at the combat to make sure there's no combat set. Actually, I'll leave it here so you can see how this all works in the combat. So I'll trigger this. My expectation is it will trigger one of these 2 things. It will play a weather event, make it moody, and then a little bit after, it's going to add one of these to the combat, roll their initiative, and start the combat. There's the rain. You did see the render there. That's just because any update to the scene can trigger a render event. All right, and then 6 seconds later, we see that combat. Krusk was the one targeted. We see that they were added to the combat. It actually rolled the combat. He got an 18 on their initiative, and then I can end it, but it started the combat. So that's what the danger just did. Yeah, I was saying like the render is a little bit unique to the scene. There's certain updates that are, if made to a scene, will cause it to render. We saw that with the little flash that happened when the weather event was played. So not something that happens every time any danger zone is triggered, but just the fact that we are updating a certain part of the scene to make the weather play, we got that render. Now, if you have the module FX Master, that also comes with a wider amount of options for weather events, and you will see those as options when you're updating the danger. So I didn't show this, but you can right-click on the button that will launch the zone. From the zone, you can view the danger. So here's the weather part again that we set earlier. So you can see there's only a limited amount of options here. If you have FX Master, you have a wider amount of options, and those won't cause a render of the scene. All right, let's check out the chat, because that's the other area that we had a setting on. You can see here the details, including who could have been targeted within the zone, the dimensions of what was of the target, where that location was. This helps with troubleshooting. Must target a location with a token, so this tells you what the targeting of the zone is, who is eligible for targets within whatever target location was. There's only one token there, and then who the hit target was. You also see my little flavor here that I added to the zone. OMG, a combat is starting. So you don't have to have a flavor, but that was there. This was a result of the initiative roll. So that's everything that happens with the danger zone. So really, the other stuff that you're going to find connected to this module are settings over here. There's a bunch of ways to clear different things that can be set. For example, you can clear out any tiles created by dangers. You can clear out on the scene. You can clear out any lighting, sounds, regions, or walls. It will only affect those that were created by danger zone. You can clear out everything. I'll just do that, but there's really nothing that was set. So that's really the extent of the module. I'll have other videos that go into other cool things you can do. I mean, that was just kind of showing the basics of everything, but I'll have further videos that go into more details. Thanks for checking this out, and I hope you have fun using the module. Find us on the JB2A Discord, and I'd love to see what you all come up with for cool stuff, and I'd love for you all to try to support that module, that team, because they put out great animations, as well as Sequencer does great stuff too.